They say we check our phones over 150 times a day. But when was the last time you checked in with yourself? Not the version of you that replies to emails, not the one that posts filtered smiles, not the person you've curated for the world to accept. I'm talking about you, underneath the noise, the real you who doesn't need an audience to exist. Carl Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what if we've built our entire lives around being who we're not? What if we've become so skilled at adapting, so fluent in pretending, that we forgot the sound of our own voice? I remember sitting alone in my car after a meeting that went terribly wrong. My team was frustrated, the project had fallen apart, but the part that shook me wasn't the failure. It was the silence, the stillness that came afterward. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed. I was blank. I looked in the rearview mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back at me. It wasn't burnout, it was something deeper, something older. A feeling I couldn't name but could no longer ignore. That was the beginning. Carl Jung called that moment the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole, and not successful, not approved, whole. It's not some spiritual idea floating above your life. It's what happens when the mask starts to slip, when the persona you've worn for years begins to crack, and the self you buried starts to speak. It doesn't begin with clarity. It begins with collapse. When the career you chase doesn't satisfy you, when the relationship you thought defined you starts to fade, when you look around and realize you followed every rule only to feel lost anyway. But that's not the end, that's the invitation. Because real transformation doesn't start with having the right answers. It starts with asking the right questions. Who am I when I stop performing? Who am I without the applause? Jung believed each person is born with a unique psychological blueprint, an oak tree hidden in the acorns. But for most of us, that tree never grows, because we're too busy trying to be what others expect. We forget to ask what our soul actually wants. And make no mistake, the soul wants something. It doesn't want you to be perfect. It doesn't want you to win. It wants you to become. But becoming requires letting go of roles, of scripts, of borrowed dreams. And for a while that feels like death. The death of the person you were pretending to be. That's why so many people resist this path. Because the ego doesn't want to die. The world won't clap for your unraveling, and there's no map, no milestone, no guarantee. But if you stay with it, if you let the silence speak, you'll start to hear something. Not from above, from within. A whisper, a memory, a pull towards something real. Not the person you were told to be, the person you already are. And that moment, the one where the outer identity shatters and the inner self begins to rise, that's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. Because wholeness doesn't begin with answers, it begins with awareness. Not to be perfect, not to be good, to be whole. There's a lie we all inherit. Sometimes it's spoken, most of the time it's not. You learn it when you're too loud in class and get told to quiet down. When you cry and someone says, be strong. When you show your true self and it's met with silence, judgment, or laughter. The lie is this: you're only lovable when you are acceptable. So you adapt, you mold yourself into what they want. You become responsible or agreeable or impressive. You stop showing certain emotions, you amplify others. Over time, you build a mask, not to deceive, but to belong. Jung called that mask the persona. It's not fake, it's functional. It helps you survive in a world that demands roles more than authenticity. But somewhere along the line, you forget it's a mask. You start confusing who you perform with who you are. I used to take pride in being the rock, the steady one, calm under pressure, always composed. I didn't realize how much that identity cost me. Until one night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and realized I hadn't cried in over 5 years. Not because nothing had happened, but because somewhere long ago I decided that strength meant silence. That's the danger of the mask. It doesn't just hide your fear, it hides your truth. But beneath that mask, something else waits. Jung called it the shadow. Not because it's bad, but because it's hidden. It's everything you pushed away to be accepted, your rage, your tenderness, your creativity, your ambition, your need. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's the part of you that refused to die. Poet Robert Bly said we all drag a long bag behind us, and into that bag we stuff the parts of ourselves that didn't win approval. Over the years, it fills with rejected traits, unspoken needs, forgotten dreams, and we carry it. Some of us drag it behind us like dead weight. Others pretend it's not there, but one day that bag splits open, you snap at someone you love, you sabotage an opportunity, you break down in a moment that doesn't make sense. That's not failure, that's the shadow knocking. Because what we refuse to face doesn't go away. It festers, it grows teeth, it demands to be seen. But here's the twist. The shadow isn't just darkness, it's also light. Fierce, unpolished light. Your laughter, your passion, your wildness, your joy. The very parts of you you're desperate to reclaim are buried in the same place you've been afraid to look. Jung said, "How can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? I must have a dark side also if I am to be whole." This isn't about becoming someone new, it's about becoming someone honest. The mask helped you survive, but the mirror tells the truth. And if you're brave enough to look, you'll see something extraordinary. You were never broken, you were buried, and the self you thought you lost has been waiting. Have you ever felt like there's a version of you watching from the shadows? Not the critic in your head, not the curated self, but something deeper, something older, a stranger that knows you and remembers everything you've forgotten. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the hidden self you've spent your whole life avoiding. It's not a flaw, it's a fact. Everyone has one. And the less you face it, the more power it gains. There's a story I read years ago that I haven't forgotten. It wasn't famous, but it stayed with me. A man, a scholar, quiet, respectable, became obsessed with a mysterious house across the street. One night, in a strange moment of curiosity, he sent his shadow to explore it. Yes, his shadow. He told it to go where he was afraid to. And it did. It slipped under the door and vanished into the unknown. But the next morning, the shadow didn't come back. Years passed. He moved on, tried to forget, until one day the shadow returned. Not as a faint outline, but as a man. It was stronger now, more confident, more ruthless, and it wanted more than to serve. It wanted to take over. That story, written by Hans Christian Andersen, wasn't just a fantasy, it was a mirror. Because when you exile a part of yourself, it doesn't disappear. It waits, it learns, it evolves in silence, and eventually it returns. Not to be integrated, but to take control. That's how people unravel. Not all at once, but in slow, confusing spirals. The loving person who suddenly lashes out, the kind soul who collapses under pressure, the achiever who implodes after reaching the top. It's not a mystery, it's the shadow breaking through the seams of a persona that no longer fits. The stranger in the dark is you, it's the parts you had to hide to survive, the anger you swallowed, the creativity you denied, the need you called weakness, the voice you silenced for the sake of fitting in. And here's the paradox, inside that shadow is everything you've been looking for, your fire, your instincts, your truth. It's all there waiting to be reclaimed. But the only way to retrieve it here is to go where you swore you'd never go. This descent is ancient. It's written in myth, in memory, in the body. Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of heaven, once descended into the underworld to meet her sister, the ruler of shadows. At every gate she gave up something, her crown, her jewels, her pride, until she stood naked before the dark, and there she died. But that death wasn't the end, it was transformation. When she rose again, she didn't just return as a goddess of light. She returned as one who had faced the dark and survived it. She came back whole. That's what this work demands, not your performance, not your perfection. Your descent, your willingness to enter the places you've avoided, to confront the grief you've buried, the rage you've numbed, the joy you've postponed. Because what you've been running from may be the thing that saves you. I had a friend once, quiet, brilliant, always the peacemaker. She never raised her voice, never asked for anything. Everyone called her balanced. But one day, without warning, she disappeared for 3 weeks. When she came back, she looked different, not broken, clear, lighter somehow. She told me she'd gone to the mountains, no phone, no work, just silence. And in that silence, she met the part of herself she'd been afraid of for years. The one that wanted to scream, the one that needed space, the one that didn't want to be the fixer anymore. She didn't kill her shadow, she listened to it, and in doing so, she became someone new. Not because she added anything, but because she reclaimed what was already hers. That's what integration means. To walk into the dark, not to destroy what's there, but to bring it back with you. Because the stranger in the dark is not your enemy, it's your guide, and when you follow it, not blindly but bravely, you don't lose yourself. You find the parts you were missing. Not to be fearless, not to be better, to be whole. What if the people who irritate you are holding pieces of your soul? What if the traits you admire in others are reflections of what you've forgotten in yourself? Carl Jung called it projection, and once you understand it, your life will never look the same. Here's how it works. Your unconscious holds everything you've repressed or disowned. It's too painful or too powerful or too different from the person you've been taught to be. So instead of facing it, you cast it outward. You see it in someone else. That's why certain people get under your skin. It's not about them. It's about what they awaken in you. A trait, a wound, a buried desire. And it's not just the shadow we project, we also project our light. Jung called this the golden shadow. It's what happens when we place our highest qualities, our courage, our beauty, our brilliance onto others, because we don't believe we're allowed to own them ourselves. Have you ever felt drawn to someone, not in a romantic way, but in awe, like they carry something ancient you're aching for? That's not worship, that's recognition. A lost part of you reflected in their presence. I remember watching a speaker once, nothing flashy, just a quiet confidence. Every word felt earned, every silence intentional. And as I sat there, I felt something rise in my chest. Not jealousy, not admiration, a longing. It was as if something in me whispered, "You were supposed to be doing that." That moment haunted me for months, until I realized it wasn't about him. It was about the version of myself I had abandoned. Projection is a mirror turned outward. But once you recognize it, you can turn it back in. Not to blame yourself, not to shame yourself, to reclaim yourself. And it goes deeper. Inside each of us is a feminine side and a masculine side. Not gender roles, but energies. Jung called them anima and animus. The anima is your capacity for tenderness, for intuition, for surrender. The animus is your clarity, your direction, your fire. Most of us suppress one or the other, taught by culture, by trauma, by habit. The result, imbalance, neediness, aggression, confusion in relationships, a deep sense of something missing. But when you begin to integrate both, when you listen to the parts you've ignored, you become whole, not divided, not defensive, at peace. The mirror turns, and what you once needed others to give you, you start to give yourself. Validation, strength, permission. Because the parts you once projected onto mentors, lovers, enemies, heroes, they were never foreign, they were fragments, and now they're coming home. We are connected to everyone, yet detached from ourselves. Every day we scroll through hundreds of lives. We watch people succeed, perform, transform, and in the process we edit our own image again and again until it no longer resembles anything real. We don't just post to express, we post to become. And every filter, every caption, every carefully selected highlight pulls us further from the parts of ourselves we can't crop, can't color correct, can't hide. Carl Jung warned about this long before the digital age. He said, the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world, becomes dangerous, not when we create it, but when we believe it's us. In the age of performance, the mask isn't just accepted, it's applauded, and that applause becomes addictive. But here's what no one says out loud. Performing a version of yourself, day after day, year after year, comes with a price. You might be admired, respected, even envied, but inside there's a quiet ache. A dull emptiness that no like, no promotion, no follower count can fill. That ache is the sound of your soul knocking, and most people don't hear it until something breaks, until the job no longer gives you meaning, until the relationship doesn't reflect who you've become, until success feels like a costume you can't take off, and that's when it begins. The slow unraveling of the identity you've carefully built. It doesn't always look like crisis, sometimes it looks like restlessness or burnout or procrastination that feels like resistance. You tell yourself you're lazy, you're unfocused, but deep down something inside you knows the truth. You're not resisting work, you're resisting the lie, you're resisting the version of yourself you've outgrown. This isn't just a personal struggle, it's a collective one. Because when enough people disconnect from their inner life, society begins to drift. And when that drift becomes a pattern, we start looking for meaning in movements, tribes, ideologies, anything that offers identity when we've lost touch with our own. Jung called this a psychic epidemic. He said the greatest threat to humanity wasn't war or poverty or disease. It was the mass loss of individual meaning. When people abandon their inner development, they become vulnerable to groupthink, polarization and blind rage, and you can see it online, in politics, in institutions, entire groups projecting their shadow onto each other, demonizing what they refuse to confront within. This is how wars begin, not on battlefields, but in the unseen war within each person, a war between the mask and the truth. But here's the hope. The work of integration doesn't just heal individuals, it heals systems, it heals cultures. Because when one person begins to own their shadow, to withdraw their projections, to live from their center rather than their performance, it changes the field around them. The tension drops, the noise quiets, authenticity becomes permission. And this isn't just poetic idealism, it's measurable. Studies in Europe have shown that Jungian therapy produces not just short-term relief, but long-term transformation. People don't just feel better, they become more themselves, less fragmented, more alive. And the effects don't fade, they deepen. Because once you begin the inner work, something anchors in you. Something that no external approval can touch. That's the real resilience, not in becoming harder, but in becoming real. I once met a man who'd spent his whole life being successful by every metric. Wealth, status, recognition. But when his daughter died, unexpectedly, his entire framework shattered. He told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Everything I built was strong, but it wasn't rooted. I realized I had never once asked myself what I believed in. I just built fast enough to outrun the question. That question eventually catches all of us. And when it does, you have two options. Double down on the mask or begin the descent. Not to burn it all down, but to finally find out who's underneath." Wholeness isn't about fixing yourself. It's about finding the parts you left behind. It's about walking back through your life, not to dwell, but to retrieve the emotions you suppressed, the dreams you abandoned, the instincts you overrode for the sake of being acceptable. And it starts simply. You pause, you feel, you ask, what in me have I ignored? What's asking to be heard? It doesn't require a therapist or a tower or a breakthrough. Sometimes it just requires a moment of silence. A moment where you stop managing yourself and start listening. Like when someone gets under your skin and instead of dismissing it, you wonder why. What wound are they touching? Like when you admire someone and instead of shrinking, you ask, what part of me sees them so clearly? Like when you feel resistance and instead of forcing yourself forward, you ask, what am I betraying in myself to keep moving? That's the practice, not striving, not controlling, becoming aware. Carl Jung didn't promise ease, he promised truth. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's the work, not transcendence, not escape, but integration. And in that integration, something begins to return. Energy, vision, peace. Not because life gets easier, but because you're no longer living at war with yourself. You stop outsourcing your power, you stop running from your needs, you stop splitting your identity into categories of good and bad, acceptable and shameful. You begin to walk as one. And that walk, however slow, however painful, is sacred. I once asked a mentor, how do I know if I'm doing the work? He said, you'll know when you stop asking how to get somewhere and start asking how to be where you are. That's the turning point. Because once you accept the invitation, not to improve but to remember, you stop performing and you begin to live. Not as a persona, not as a role, but as a self, a whole, rooted, real self. So if you've made it here, know this, you've already begun. The path isn't in front of you, it's under you. And it starts with one question, one scar, one memory, one truth you're finally ready to stop avoiding. Sit with it, you don't need to fix it, you just need to meet it. Because healing doesn't begin with perfection, it begins with presence. And the moment you choose to turn inward, to return to yourself, to say yes to what you've been told to fear, the moment is everything, not to be perfect, not to be seen, to be whole. If you feel this, if something moved in you, drop into the comments. What part of you is asking to come home? Someone else might read your words there and remember something of their own. And just like that, the work spreads. Quietly, honestly, one self at a time.